Congressman Adam Smith, thank you so much for joining us today, representing our 9th Congressional District.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Of course, the big, beautiful bill. That's what a lot of people are talking about right now. You would, of course, call it something different. You've called it reckless and cruel. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts.
Well, I mean, basically, it robs from the poor to give to the better off. I mean, it is the exact opposite of where we should be taking economic policy. And they do all of that and drive the debt up by $3.4 trillion. So it is primarily tax cuts that benefit primarily the wealthy, certainly the upper middle class and above, where it takes money away from the working poor and the working class, which is the exact opposite of what we need to be doing. It cuts access to health care and food for people in the roughly bottom 60% of income earners. And then all these tax cuts on the top end drive up the debt and make it tougher for people to get ahead. Look, that's the economic challenge. We have had too much of a concentration of wealth and opportunity in this country. The bottom 60% really struggle. Statistics show that the bottom 60% of wage earners, basically could not absorb a $1,000 surprise bill. So helping them is important, and now we're making it tougher for them to get health care, we're making it tougher for them to get access to food, all to pay for a bunch of tax cuts for people on the high end of our economic spectrum.
Putting it in like a day-to-day perspective for someone who's just watching this on their TV, what types of impacts might they be noticing when they're looking at their own family budget or really their health?
Yeah, it sort of depends on where you're at. And look, I'm not going to lie. I mean, if you're at the top end, you'll probably see some reduction in your taxes. But again, if you're someone who ever has to rely on support for food, support for healthcare, you're not going to be able to get it. We're going to have more people who are uninsured and more people who are food insecure. And I hope people understand this doesn't just apply to a certain group of people. I mean, when I was growing up, my father's company, he worked for United Airlines out at SeaTac Airport. He went on strike a couple of times, and both times he went on strike, our income went down, and I was on I forget what they called it at the time, a food program. I got free lunch at school that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So people are going to go through those dips, and now you're not going to have that support system in place. And then once you get down the future, another $3.4 trillion to a $35 trillion debt, how long before that's going to start to have an impact on our ability to fund a wide variety of programs? And we're seeing that in some of the cuts that the Trump administration has already done. Cuts in things that impact, air traffic control, scientific research, NOAA, weather forecasting, as we have seen, what the tragedy that happened in Texas. So all of that basically, once again, concentrates more wealth, power, and opportunity in the hands of the few who already have it, at the expense of the many who in many cases are struggling just to have basic opportunity.
Let's talk foreign policy now. We have conflicts in Ukraine, in the Middle East. We're just in recent days, we have President Trump changing course in terms of supplying weapons to Ukraine, hearing some criticism of Putin. What's your take or criticism that you have of President Trump's foreign policy?
Well, my take, particularly in Ukraine, is he showed weakness to Putin when he walked in, and it was a huge mistake. By criticizing Zelensky, by attacking Ukraine, in some instances, there were members of the Trump administration who blamed the war on Ukraine after Russia and Putin had invaded. That basically gave Putin a big green light to continue his attacks. The only way to stop the war in Ukraine is to convince Putin that he can't take all of Ukraine, to force him to the peace table, force him to negotiate. And Ukraine was doing a pretty good job of that. I mean, their courage and their tenacity to block this invasion was impressive, as was the 53-nation coalition that the Biden administration put together to support Ukraine. By undermining that coalition, he gave Putin hope that he could keep fighting and win. And now it seems like just in the last week, President Trump is waking up to whatever, and I'm not going to use the word here in a family program that Trump used, but Putin lies. Putin isn't interested in peace, something that we all knew a long time ago. So maybe Trump's waking up to that, but the weakness that he showed on Ukraine at the start of his administration has prolonged this war and emboldened and empowered Russia and Putin.
Let's talk about the Democratic Party right now as we set our sights perhaps to the future here. You have Republicans in power of the White House and in Congress as well. What is the Democratic strategy in coming up to an answer to try and regain some power?
Yeah, I view it as a three-step approach. Number one, I think we do need to call the Trump administration out for their authoritarian steps. We've seen this in a variety of different ways. I mean, Trump is shaking down media. You're seeing, basically, if he doesn't like the story you report, he's going to sue you, figure out some way to do it. And we're seeing media, large media companies like CBS and others, basically pay off Trump, pay the bribe basically to stop that. He's going after law firms that they represent Democrats. He is, launching a domestic law enforcement approach. We saw that in ICE raids just recently, the one in White Center, where masked, unidentified people show up. They're snatching people off the streets. It is a drift towards authoritarianism that we need to stand up for our democracy. That's number one. Number two, we have to show how the Trump administration's policies are hurting us economically, to the point we talked about earlier about what their budget bill did, to make it tougher on the poor and the working class, to help the wealthy. The tariff policy that is causing so much turmoil, devastating rural areas. The cuts to Medicaid are going to shut down rural hospitals and make healthcare tougher to get. So that's the policy argument. But the third thing we have to do is offer a reasonable alternative. The public was not satisfied with the way the Democratic Party handled border security, crime, homelessness, drugs, economic policy, identity politics. We have to show that we've learned some things in the last 5 or 6 years, and we're going to address the concerns the American people have with Democrats. Just attacking Trump, in my opinion, will not be enough. We have to present a reasonable alternative.
Is there anything you would like your constituents to know within your own district, or anything that you're working on specifically?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different issues, but one of the ones I'm most excited about is, so I'll mention two: workforce development and housing. There's so much change going on in terms of what employers are looking for. We need to make sure that we're giving people the skills they need to go out and be competitive in the workplace. We've got community and technical colleges. We've got a lot of unions and businesses engaging in apprenticeships and pre-apprentice programs. We've got an increasing number of high schools who do career and technical education, CTE. And that's really how we need to pivot. You can't just force everyone to go off and get a 4-year degree. We have to give wider options. And there are a ton of great programs in our district to give people those options. Actually, there is one good thing in the budget bill. It actually is going to allow for Pell Grants and federal assistance for people getting job training, not just 4-year degrees. So if you want to learn how to be a cable installer, you want to be a construction worker, and there's a training cost to that, you will now have access to some funds for that. So workforce development, and then we got to build more housing. I'm working with a number of different nonprofits and others to try to get as much funds as possible to build housing. But we really have to change our permitting and how expensive it is to build housing. It takes too long. There's too much bureaucracy, too much focus on process as opposed to getting housing built. Housing affordability is the number one biggest challenge in my district and the number one biggest issue that I'm focused on.
All right, Congressman Smith, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate the chance.